I'm going to go ahead and finish disassembling the clock. And one thing that I wanted to point out is right here, the way that the clock actually connects electrically to the 12 volts is there's a lug nut that protrudes here, and that's the plus 12 volts. And the way that it grounds out is through this little solder point right here. So in order to effectively remove this, we're going to have to desolder this little point right here. And Mercedes has made it easy by isolating the solder joint so that it doesn't have a lot of heat sink, and so with a very little amount of heat on the solder tip you can pull that off, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. But right now let's zoom back out again, and I'm going to complete the disassembly of this. As you take this apart, you'll be left with the speedometer and the clock, and there'll be two little screws left that you have to pull out. One here, set those aside with the other items, and one up here. Okay. Now that you've done that, you can actually, this just pulls straight out, and I'm going to set the actual plastic housing aside, get it out of the way here so that we don't, so that it's not bothering us. You'll notice that right here is the tachometer and right here is the clock. One of the first things we want to do is we want to get these hands and remove these hands. Unfortunately, in removing the hands, sometimes we scratch the face of the clock, and that's not a good thing to do. So if you you can buy the repair video from us, or you can buy the repair video plus the parts plus the miscellaneous little extra tools you'll need that aren't typically in a normal person's toolkit. And one of the things is a synthetic felt disc that we'll give you, and there's a little cutout that you'll need to make that just slips right over this. As you can see, it slips over that to protect it, so that when we remove that, we don't scratch it. And then what you do is you just gently slide in a screwdriver and pop off the hour hand, and we'll set the hour hand to the side, and then you gently slide in a screwdriver and slide off, protecting the face now from any kind of damage. You slide off the minute hand, and you can see now that other than a little bit of particulate that came off of that, we were able to remove the hands without any damage to the face of the clock. Alright, the next thing that we want to do is, you'll notice that inside here there's actually the tachometer movement, which moves the tach, and then there's the clock movement here, which actually causes the clock to move. We want to get to this clock mechanism without having to disassemble the tach. And so the way that we're going to do that is, the very first thing that we do is, as I mentioned before, we want to, the other thing is I'll lay this down so that the face is laying on the synthetic felt and it doesn't scratch it. But the next thing that you're going to need is a soldering iron. And the soldering iron that I have is one that we've used in previous videos. You can see it goes up to from 250 to 480 degrees Celsius. I've got it set just a little bit over 400 because we want it to melt the solder very quickly. So you need a soldering iron, and you want to make sure that the tip is clean. And then it's some way we have to remove the solder that's there. There's really two methods. One is with what's called a solder sucker, or a solder vac in this case, and you index it, you cock it by pulling that up, and then what you'll do is, as you push that, a diaphragm pulls up, the spring-loaded diaphragm, and it creates suction at the tip right here, and that will pull solder away. Unfortunately for this one, I don't like that because it can spew solder around, and I don't particularly like this method. So what I'm going to use is some solder, what's called solder wick, and this happens to be made by Chemtronics. You can get this at most of your electronics store. Radio Shack has it. Some of the Radio Shacks. I'm going to cut off the piece and get to a a virgin piece of the solder wick. The way that you remove the solder is you apply, I'm going to zoom in here, is you apply the, we're going to move this back here where you can see it a little bit better. You apply heat to it, and as the heat melts, the copper wire actually absorbs the solder. So I'm going to come up to the top here where so you can see it a little bit better, and I'm going to put this on there and let it heat up. It will heat up, and you'll see the solder actually wick into the copper braid, and as it wicks into it, I pull it away just to make sure that it evacuates all of the solder, and then I do it on the other side. And you continue to do that until all the solder has been removed from that. In this particular case, I'll try the solder back and see how it works, just to give you a demonstration. Let it get molten, melt the solder, and then put the wick on there, or the solder sucker, the solder back, and it creates a vacuum and will literally suck off the molten solder. So here I'll do it again. And as you can see, it creates kind of a spray here. It doesn't remove it cleanly, but okay. So I'll go back to the wick and continue to remove it, the solder, until a little more heat here, until it's clean. Okay, zoom in here and you can see that we've cleaned off the solder, and that is ready now to be pulled off. Okay, now that we've got the solder all cleaned off of here, we want to remove the remaining the screws that hold it in. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to be able to pull the mechanism off of here while we remove the clock. Now that we've removed the hand, the clock is not attached. The clock is not attached to the face at all, other than the hands here prevent the face from coming off. So now that we've got that, we could pull the tachometer and the face and the tack arm, the needle, without we could pull that off without causing damage. But the way that we have to do that is, first of all, we have to loosen the tack. We have to loosen the tack mechanism, and you do that by loosening these three screws right here. They tend to be pretty tight, or 20 years of sitting there have made them pretty rigid. So take off these three screws. You don't mess with these two right here. They're adjustment screws, and you don't want to mess with those. So we'll take off these three screws here. Okay. And what that does is that holds the tack mechanism to the metal frame. We want to loosen these two screws so that the clock mechanism will come out once we get the tack moved away. We get those two screws out of the way. Okay, now as we flip this over, the only thing that's preventing us from pulling this out now are the three screws, and this one happened to be missing on this. The three screws here, and then we can lift the tack mechanism out and set it to the side, and then that clock mechanism will just lift out. So I'm going to shift to some finer screwdrivers that I have, rather than this big one, to remove the screws from the face, and they're more of a fine jeweler's type of screw. Okay, now that that's there, I can actually lift the tack mechanism out, as you can see, and I can move it to the side. And what happens now is if we've done it right, this mechanism will just lift right out. Unfortunately, the solder is holding it just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to melt that. I'm going to melt that as I pull it out. And now the clock mechanism, other than this styrofoam that holds it, is kind of corroded, as you can see, that, and it's keeping it from pulling off cleanly. So I'm going to pull that off, that foam. I'm going to pull that off and set it to the side. Okay. You want to keep that in as good a condition as you can. Okay. Now you'll notice that there's some particulate here. We want to make sure that that doesn't get in the way. So I'll move that over to the side, and we'll throw that in the garbage. And so I'm going to gently lay that back down. I'm going to move this to the side, the tack and the face. And the next thing I want to do is, okay, the next thing we want to concentrate is actually the clock movement. You'll notice that regardless of whether it's a 123 or a 126, there's two fairly large capacitors that sit right here. They're electrolytic. The value on them is approximately 16 volts, 100 microfarad. And over time, what happens is the heat that develops in the dashboard and in the area around the instrument cluster heats up, and what happens is these two electrolytic capacitors right here will dry out. So what we're going to do is we're going to unsolder these and pull them out, and then we're going to insert new ones. At the same time, you'll notice that as that foam rubber deteriorates, it gives off particulates, and down in here there's some particulates that have got down inside the clock mechanism and may prevent it from operating properly. So you can see on this wheel right here, there's some particulate that's there, and it might get in there and jam. So we're gonna blow that out while we've got it out of the car, all in here, and make sure that this this piece right here is not going to adversely affect the performance of the clock. But first of all, I'll go ahead and show you how to remove those. I'm going to move my black dot back here, if you will, just to give me a pretty good solder base, and if I drop any solder, I don't want to burn the top of this desk. And I'm going to orient it so that both of these capacitors are aiming this direction. Again, I turn up my soldering iron, and you can either use the solder vac in this case if you'd like, or you can use the solder wick. I'm going to use the solder vac, but at this point I'm going to pull the old solder out of here, and now what I want to do is I want to heat up one of the joints, and as the solder solidifies, or I'm sorry, liquefies, you apply your solder vac or your wick, and it removes the solder. So in this case, I'm going to use some solder wick. It pulls it off pretty nicely in that case. And another way, if you don't have any solder wick or vac, is to heat up one of these leads and you gently rock it. So you apply pressure in this case, and the lead will back out just a little bit, and then the solder will solidify, and then you heat the other one and pull this way and pull this way, and finally, eventually, the capacitor will pull out. You'll notice, I don't know if you can see it or not, but that one lead is right here is coming in and out because I've removed the solder. This one still has some solder on it, so I'll move in a little closer here so you can see a little bit better. That one still has a little bit of solder on it. as this accumulates solder, as this wick accumulates solder, you have to cut it and expose some virgin unused wick, and then what I want to do is apply it here and pull the solder off that end. You can see it actually, if you look close, you can see it liquefy and come off, and now the capacitor just gently slides right out of there. I'm going to take this old capacitor. As you can see, it's pretty old, probably about 20 years old. It's done the job, and I set it to the side. And now I'll just perform the same procedure on the other. It appears in this case that the solder wick has been performing better than the solder vac, so I'm going to continue to use that. Heat it up, let the solder wick evacuate the soft solder. You can tell by gently melting it, and when the lead will rock in and out. And now I'll do it to the other one. And now that I've got this one unsoldered, the capacitor should just almost drop right out of there. And as you can see, it's very loose here, and it just dropped right out. So now I can put the new ones in. And when putting the new ones in, they are electrolytic, which means that they are polarized, and so you have to get them back in the way that you took them out. Okay, now that we've removed the old capacitors, and that typically is all you'll have to do. In a couple cases, clocks that I've repaired, these leads that run through here, it's gotten so hot up inside there that these leads have actually burned, and I've had to replace the leads. But in this case, you don't have to. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if you buy you bought the video and the parts from us, we will send you some capacitors that are rated for a real high temperature, and they should last for many more years. But the 100 microfarad 16 volts you can get at a Radio Shack or any local distributor. The ones that I happened to get were 35 volts. They're 100 microfarad 35 volts, but they'll work just the same. One thing that I want to point out is these are polarized. This one, as you noticed, has a minus sign here pointing to this lead. So this lead right here is the minus lead. And you'll notice on the circuit board itself, there's a minus right here and a minus right here. So you want to make sure that the minus lead from the electrolytic capacitor goes through that particular hole. So I'll back the video off a little bit so you can see. So I align the negative to go through that hole, and what I typically do is I push the replacement capacitor in place like this, and then I bend the leads to give it some physical security so it doesn't slide off. And now I'll put the other one in, once again making sure that the negative lead goes into the negative hole. Have it go in, it goes in and slides up to the top, and now I bend the lead, making sure that the capacitor that I'm replacing is close to the circuit board and situated fairly straight up and down. And now I am going to solder those. I'm trusting that you know how to solder. take a fine tip and a piece of electronic solder, and you just heat the area and make sure you put enough solder on there to make a little volcano. I've shown you in some of my other videos how to do that. If you're not comfortable with that, you can either find a friend who is, or take it to a local tech school like DeVry and have them, you know, pay a student $5 to do the soldering for you, and I'm sure they'll be happy to do that. So solder the other lead, the other two leads. And set the solder aside. I take a pair of wire clippers and I'm going to clip off the excess length of the leads. Those are not going to be needed, and as a matter of fact would be detrimental if we left them there. So I cut off the leads, and typically that's all that goes wrong. That's all that goes wrong with these clocks. Okay, is that occasionally the lead may pull up off the circuit board. That's all right, as long as it's still making connection to the electrical connection to the lead next to it. And in this particular case, not that it did that, but I just want to reflow the solder to make sure that it makes a good electrical connection. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this outside where I have an air compressor and some air, and I'm going to blow those little particles out of there, and I'm going to come back and show you how to test it to make sure everything works fine. Outside and blew it off. Some of the particulate is pretty stubborn, and you may not be able to get it to come off with just an air hose. In some cases you may have to take a little screwdriver and kind of knock them off. I have a air gun that's pretty powerful, and it still didn't get all of these off of there. Now the foam that was here is simply it acts as a standoff so that none of these leads short up against that metal piece that this was mounted to. So I'm not going to put that back on, and in place of the foam standoff, what I did was I just went down to my local hardware store, and this happens to be some self-adhesive bumpers that I got from the local hardware store, and they go on cabinets, and they're just little square. In this case happened to be octagonal, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place those at various points, the odds and ends here, the odd sizes. I'll just place those at various points on the circuit board itself to give it the distance needed, and it's approximately the same distance that the foam was, but it's not going to create the particulate. So by placing those on there, I've now been able to create a buffer so that I can place this back on and keep it from shorting out, but at the same time I've replaced the foam with some standoffs that are going to be cleaner and not create the particulate matter that the others did, as I mentioned. Okay, what I have here is just a small battery charger. I've got it set for the 12 volts, and I have some alligator clips here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the negative, the minus, and remember that went to this particular lead right here. That was the one that was soldered to the outside, and make sure that and then I'm going to take the plus and I'm going to attach it to this lead right here. And what should happen is you should see this start to pulse, and you can see that it's pulsing right there. I'll zoom in and I'll show you what it's doing. It's pulsing now, a little bit upside down here and tricky, but you can see that the clock's pulsing, so it's been repaired. Okay, now that we've tested it and it's pulsed, we're gonna assemble it back into the case. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to gently pull the case back over here. We've got our soldering iron warming up over off camera. So what I want to do is turn this around and insert this back into the hole here. Alright, so we flip this over and we guide this back into the hole. Now here we're going to need the hole cleared of the solder, so we want to make sure that hole is clear. Okay, as an alternative to clearing the hole, if there's still solder in there, what you can do is get the plastic tabs aligned, the plastic protrusions here through the hole, and the little tab there, and then heat that, and as you heat that, push it through and melt it. Now it's pushed through. The clock is now back in, and you can let it now the solder will solidify. Okay, and then we can attach the screws to it, and we'll put the tachometer back on. You remember that the long screws were the ones that we had in there, so we'll put the long plastic screws in there, and find the right screwdriver. We put the screws back in to hold the clock in position. I'll just put this other screw in, and then we'll start up the camera from there. Okay, we've got the other screw in, so now we want to gently flip this back over and position the tachometer into position. Okay, I've got the tach position. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to put these 3 screws in here, and then we'll put the screws in the face, and then I'll show you how to test it after we get that all assembled. Okay, we've got the 3 screws started in holding the tach back on. So what I'm going to do is just tighten them down. And now we're going to flip that back over this direction, and then we're going to position the tach face back in place and replace the 3 screws, and then I'll show you how to test the clock when I get those back in. Okay, I started a screw here, and as you recall, this one over here was missing. So I'm just going to tighten the screws down.
You got the whole thing printed out. So.
Alright, so now that we've got that back on, what we want to do is we want to take our clock hands, and the best way to do the clock hands is position the hour hand pointing straight down at the 6, and you push it down until you don't want it to touch the face, but you want it to be close enough to the face. So it just pushes down on, and then you want to get the minute hand, and the minute hand will then point directly up. And so if you can get them in a linear position like that, directly one on top of the other, then what you can do is you can now set the clock. So I'm going to set it directly at 6 o'clock. Okay, I'm going to back out here a little bit. I'm going to take my battery charger that's set for 12 volts, and I take the negative lead, and I'm going to just ground it, and the positive lead I'm going to hook to that spade connector that comes out the back like that. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is making sure it doesn't short out here. I don't want it to short out on that. And one way to do that is to prop it up with my solder wick. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug the battery charger in, and I'm going to let this run for about 10 minutes. And when I come back in 10 minutes, this should have moved 10 minutes ahead, obviously. So that's how we're going to test it. I'm going to stop the camera, and we'll be back in probably about 10 minutes. As you can see, I came back a little bit later than 10 minutes. It's been about 15 minutes, and the clock's gone past the the 15 minutes. So you can see that it's working. So now what I would do is simply put it back in the cluster, instrument cluster casing, and assemble it back into the car, and everything's working fine.